Welcome back. I hand you over now to Urvashi Rupnarayan for this week's feature, The Pandemic Economy. Urvashi?
Thank you, Disha. Good evening and welcome to The Pandemic Economy. It's our pre-budget show where we bring you some of the most talked about items on the economic landscape ahead of Monday's 2022 budget presentation. I'm Urvashi Rupnarayan, joined by my co-host, political analyst and commentator Derek Ramsamuch. Tonight's topic is construction and procurement. The property tax will also be explored. And our panel tonight, we are pleased to welcome Afra Raymond, Chartered Surveyor, Managing Director of Raymond and Peer Limited. He served as past president at the Joint Consultative Council for the Construction Industry, and that was from 2010 to 2015, and also of the Institute of Surveyors of Trinidad and Tobago. Next up, we have Derek Outridge, Quantity Surveyor, Valuer, Attorney at Law, Arbitrator, Author, Senior Lecturer at the University of the West Indies. Among his publications, Delayed Payments, Impacts on Planned Cash Flow of Small and Medium Contractors for a Special Purpose Company. Mr. Outridge, why not kick off by giving us an idea of government's debt to contractors?
Well, government's debt to contractors have been exponentially increasing over the decades. 2005, it was 500 million. 2010, it was $1 billion. In 2015, it became 2 billion. By 2020, nobody could calculate whether it was 4 billion or more. So we don't know what it's going to be by 2025 because these things come up every time there's an election. So right now, we would like to see post-pandemic coming in this budget, prompt payment legislation in order to resolve this problem. We cannot continue like this. We cannot continue to have the debt to the construction sector because what that does, that reduces business profitability. It tarnishes the reputation of contractors to their suppliers and so forth abroad. It causes contractors to seek additional funds. It causes projects to be delayed. And when the projects are delayed, the taxpayer, the users, they aren't able to get these facilities for their use on time. It causes additional costs as a result of the added time. So there's increased construction costs. When the contractors don't get paid, their suppliers, right down the whole supply chain, gets affected. They are paid late. Subcontractors are paid late. Their own labor employees, they can't pay wages on time, and therefore their families suffer. So it causes a whole host of difficulties in respect of material and supply of goods.
Okay, so if we were to, I just want to move on from that, Derek, to Afra. Both of you gentlemen are known with respect to the public procurement legislation, their strengths and the weaknesses. I would like to start with you first, Afra, with respect to your views, why it has worked, why it's not worked, what we can do. Remember, money is a lot scarcer in this economy right now. How do we deal with the public procurement legislation?
Well, let me say something, Derek. Thank you for the invitation to come on the show. Firstly, the debt that Derek was referring to, that my colleague Derek Outridge was referring to in the last stanza, I estimated it in September 2016 to be over 3.8 billion. I had a very detailed estimate I prepared in a series of articles I was writing in the newspaper. One of the positive impacts, let me bring some focus into this question, Dr. Ramsamuch. One of the positive impacts the public procurement, there are two Dereks. One of the positive impacts the public procurement law will bring to this issue is that state enterprises and the state agencies and ministries will no longer be able to put out to tender jobs for which they don't have money. That is one of the unspoken problems in all of this. So we have a situation where there's $10 to spend, just to make a simple example. And contracts will be let. Contracts will be awarded for $30. Therefore, there's a perpetual scramble to get paid. This is not a question that is peculiar to this government or the one that was in office prior. This is actually a bane of our governance, and Outridge knows about it. He's written about it at length. And the Public Procurement Act contains provisions that a procuring entity cannot list a project for tender unless funding has been identified. And this is to prevent one of the unspoken problems in the construction industry. The reason that most of the state's projects run over cost and run over time is because they're inadequate financial provisions for the projects. That's one of the unstated reasons. We like to think about it as something exotic and criminal and gangsterish and so on. Sometimes it's a lot more disorganized than that. And the point about payment that you've started off in, Dr. Ramsey, which is an absolutely seminal point, getting to the beginning of this whole question. So thank you.
Derek, I would like to follow up because you began a conversation with me off air about the type of legislation required, the prompt payment legislation.
Very good.
Could you explain to the population what's the thinking following out from the public procurement?
Yeah. Prompt payment legislation will be just as important as procurement law. Prompt payment legislation mandates the person who has initiated the project to pay the contractors in accordance with the terms and conditions of that contract. And if they fail to do so, there are penalties. Now, I agree with Afra that the procurement law that is to come will deal with the issue of identifying the source of funds.
Yes.
But we already have that. The question is, they identify the source of funds, but they do not allocate the money to the relevant agency at the time that payment is required. And that is why we have the problem with non-payment. What I'm saying is that prompt payment legislation is definitely needed to ensure that the largest employer in the construction sector, who employs 85% of construction works annually, that he is the biggest guilty party and he must pay. He has 32 special purpose companies in the construction industry and they rack up this debt. He doesn't, they need to add up what all these 32 special purpose companies, their invoices that they send into finance, and see how much money that they're owing and who they're owing, and stop asking the construction industry to send us a list to validate this when you have it already in your ministry. And that's what I want to see post-pandemic.
One quick follow-up before I turn over to you, Rashid. I hear this about the legislation for public procurement and now for the prompt payment. But don't you believe we take an extraordinary long time to not only get this legislation passed, but actually begin to get all the moving parts for implementation? Derek first and then Afra.
Well, I do hope that prompt payment legislation doesn't take as long as the procurement law. The procurement law is long in waiting. It's been there, being amended and amended and amended. Right now, we're now waiting for the regulations to be laid in Parliament for affirmative resolution in order for its full implementation.
Afra?
Well, to support Derek, that law, the law that we're discussing tonight, that law was actually drafted by our colleagues at JCC and the TTMA and the manufacturers and the Transparency Institute and the trade unions. That was drafted and submitted to Dr. Tiwari. He was Minister of Planning and Development in December of 2010.
Right.
Okay?
You see?
That is how many years ago. It was drafted by the private sector, by the civil society, and submitted to the government as a complete draft with a complete set of regulations. Okay? December of 2010. I was part of the process. And since then, we've been fighting, irrespective of the fact that at that time another party was in power. And at this time, the opposite party is in power. We have been fighting to get from the point of having submitted a complete law to getting a law that has all the moving parts. And let's start working in this way. And the country needs it. Because we cannot keep on spending our money and hearing these stories about money that was wasted here and money that was wasted there, and this project that's gone wrong, and people who run away to other countries and all of these sorts of exotic things. Okay? We need to get down and have a situation where we get value for money when we spend money in this country. There's less and less money available. People are in a period of tremendous sacrifice. And it is important, if we have to hold things together, that we make these steps. Let us, for once in our miserable lives, finish what we started.
I'd like to find out from you, gentlemen, I'd like to find out from you, gentlemen, how does a government or successive governments, as you mentioned, get away with racking up such a debt? Do you have to have prompt payment legislation in order to get paid and get paid on time? And can we have an idea of the number of cases currently in court where contractors are attempting to get their money from the state?
Can I just say something before, Derek? I know you have a lot to say on this. Can I just say a kind of overall question about this question, Bobashi? Very valuable question. One of the key things to understanding why it perpetuates, which is what you started off asking, is that in fact, the clauses, the common clauses in the contracts, the building contracts, the common clauses in the building contract that allow a contractor to get more money the more time it takes him to get paid or crew to get paid, those clauses are often amended or deleted by the state using their bargaining power. So in fact, we all understand that time is money, except in a lot of cases when the government owes you money, you don't get it. So that law Derek is talking about will be an important step to counter that tendency. So Derek, that's it.
And the point that you're making, why did our contractors letting this? If government finances 85% of the construction industry, which contractor is going to tell him? Which contractor is going to? They are like being victimized by this monopoly in the construction industry. And not only that, two of the major state special purpose companies that nearly all the work goes through, they are the biggest offenders in terms of amending the contract to delete paying them the interest and finance charges, to delete paying them on time.
We all know that.
And extend the time and so forth. You know, and what happens to the poor contractor? What can he do? The thing is to wind up and not work tomorrow.
Yeah. And that's why many jobs take a long time to finish and cost more than intended.
That's right. And it's not
the reality of cost overruns and delays.
Yeah. We have always heard in every successive budget or government policies where we want to have, young small entrepreneurs, where the construction sector is supposed to provide opportunities for small entrepreneurs. The whole notion of the box drain scenario, community entrepreneurs. But really, have we done a sufficiently enough good job to equip our entrepreneurs with the skills required for construction, and now with green construction and environmentally friendly construction in a pandemic era? Can we make that shift?
No, you can't, because you're owing them money. Listen, green construction costs 20% more than the normal construction. So it means you have to find more money. But you can't even pay the normal. How are you going to pay 120? So let me put it like this. When you can't pay your construction sector, they cannot invest and retool to become competitive or to become innovative or whatever it is. You are stifling their growth by not paying them. So to tell me that you want innovation and so forth, it's not going to happen if you're not paying them. You need to pay people. And listen, if you were working at, say, TV6 here, and they didn't pay you, you have to go and borrow money from the bank. And then when they pay you, they don't give you the interest and additional monies. And they don't give you all of that. You, at the end of the day, end up with a loss by the time you get the money. Because when you go and you pay back who you borrow the money from, you're still owing the interest and finance charges, which the government not giving, not paying. They need deleting that clause. So whatever profit you were supposed to get gets eroded now. And therefore, that profit is what you use now to retool and to reinvent and to improve and to grow. And therefore, you start, listen, the construction industry is the economic barometer of a country. If you don't pay, you create an economic drag in the construction industry. When you create an economic drag in the construction industry, you create an economic drag on the economy, and therefore you stifle growth. It's simple economics.
Mr. Outridge, let me just interject here. Can you give us an idea of the number of cases currently before the courts where contractors are attempting to get their money from the state? Then I have a follow-up question after.
Well, I can tell you that there was the case of Jack Binu, who lost, you know, the state used the Limitation of Certain Actions Act to prevent him getting his money, which was retention money, money validly due to him. They say 4 years passed. The block. The judge in that trial said, my hands are tied because there's no defense to the Limitations Act, right? My hands are tied. The state should do the right thing and pay the man his money. Then came Caribbean Consulting Architects. They used the same Limitation Act to prevent paying them $105 million. Jasper Bogal, they used the same Limitations Act not to pay him $7 million. Forum A&D, they used, just recently, just 2 years ago, they used the same Limitations Act to avoid paying him $88 million. And my understanding is that there are a slew of cases against the EFCL, you know, with judgments granted for payment. You know, there's the EMBD that have a number of cases in court where the contractors are claiming billions of dollars, and the EMBD is saying, well, you know, you didn't do the quality job, you know, so you couldn't get paid. So we're talking about something very important here. And like I say, prompt payment legislation is overdue. It needs to come now.
Mr. Raymond, quick question. How have individual lives been affected now, employees all the way down the tiers? I mean, the construction sector is long known as that sector where people with even a criminal past can seek gainful employment. Your thoughts on this, individual lives?
In relation to what, a recession?
The recession, the non-payment, everything in the sector.
Okay. Well, to answer your question, it's had a tremendous impact. I'd support what Derek is saying. I would make the point that according to the research from the Central Bank and the University of the West Indies, the sector in the economy with the greatest linkages, the sector which is the largest, with the largest impact in the economy, is the construction sector. From clothing to insurance, to food, to drink, to transportation, to hardware stores, yeah? And all of those things are what economists call linkages. So when a project
multiplier
starts,
effect.
Yes, they have a multiplier effect in the wider onshore economy. When a project starts, because a significant amount of the material is sourced here, whether it's sand, gravel, cement, yeah, steel, windows, doors, roof, a significant amount. We don't give ourselves enough credit in certain things, but a significant amount of the parts to make up a typical building are indigenously sourced. Okay, yeah. So it has an enormous impact when the sector is not working properly and people are not being paid properly, and there are interruptions, the payment cycle, and so on. It has a tremendous impact in the society and in the economy. And these are very cogent points Derek Outridge is making, and I totally support it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and for every job created on
Mr. Outridge, you're going to have to hold that thought. We're going to have to take a quick break. The discussion continues when we get back. Welcome back to the pandemic economy. It's a little change of pace here where we talk property tax. I'm going to cross over to my co-host, Derek Ramsamuj.
Hi, again. Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlemen, we have 5 minutes. Afra, property tax. Do's, don'ts, views, concerns.
Well, the property tax is long overdue. Property owners have paid no tax since the end of 2009. That is 12 years of no tax. That is an extremely long, free ride. Property tax is long overdue. Having said that, the government of the day has a very slim majority, and to put this unpopular tax into place would consume a tremendous amount of political capital. So it really is beyond a technical and a professional question. It really is a political question, whether they push right all the way down and actually do it. That's my my quick answer to you, Derek.
Okay, my quick addition to that, as you said,
Sure.
the political response. When you consider Margaret Thatcher and the whole notion of the poll tax,
Yes.
and when you consider a couple of years ago we had Axe the Tax,
Yes.
and you look at the economic hardships that are facing the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the question is, while property tax is needed, is now the most appropriate time? And also, is there the probability of anybody being able to politically maneuver these forms to be filled that could probably lead to some sort of negative fallout? So I agree with you. The government needs to be careful. Derek Outridge.
No, when Maggie Thatcher introduced that poll tax, which is the equivalent of our property tax, it was in a similar period, and it led to her downfall. She lost her job. Now, she was prepared to do that in order to get what was required, revenue, into government. There's no right time for introducing property tax. At every time you try to introduce it, you're going to have objections. Now is not the right time. There's never going to be a right time. At some stage, somebody's got to do it and pay the political price, probably.
Agreed, somebody has to do it, but the question is it too sensitive an issue? And talking about sensitivity, you raised a point very quickly that dealt with all the 32 special purpose companies. Afra, can we afford to restructure those to streamline it to be much more efficient?
Well, I don't even think it's a question of can we afford, Derek. Where we are now as a country, the question is, can we afford to continue going the way we've been going? The mismanagement, the impact in the wider economy, which we've discussed through the prism of payment for construction. The 32 companies Derek Outridge mentioned are just related to construction. There are many more state enterprises. The question is, can we afford to continue doing as we have been doing? And I don't think the answer is yes. Again,
it's a second public service, so you pay twice.
A parallel public service. And again, the question really is a question of political capital and the limited political capital available to the government. So this is really become a political question again.
And that's why what I'm arguing is that the pandemic economy must not only be the balance of payments and expenditure and revenue. It is how do we use the budget to create wealth to sustain the transition? Anyone's thoughts?
Listen, the construction industry at one time used to bring in a lot of foreign currency to Trinidad and Tobago from the region. By not paying them, they have starved them from doing that because you cannot be competitive if you can't retool. You need to pay a construction industry. Not only that, when was the last time we had tech work training?
Afra?
No, I quite agree with Derek. It's a serious issue in terms of the payment of people because the money, cash flow is king. If you don't have the cash flow, you can't survive. Credit can only take you so far because eventually the bank will eat you, for supper. You need to have your own flow of money. And if you don't have that, the bankers and the financiers will eat you, which is what a lot of these small and medium contractors have been going through. We both know it. A lot of them have been going through that, developers and so on.
Talking about contractors, should we still be producing that quantum of public housing through the HTC housing, or should we better find financing for first-time owners and capital, which is a major issue for construction?
Well, I think the HTC's program must continue. I think the HTC's program is misdirected because it's directed towards ownership. 95% of the people in the waiting list cannot afford to own a home. We need to be having a different conversation. The conversation needs to be about people who are in need and poor people. The way the act is written, the HGC Act, it is for low and medium income households. Low is put ahead of medium. That is the priority in the law. We need to return to those priorities. So that's my answer to you.
Well, the priority of the NHA, its vision and mission statement before the HDC was to provide housing for those who would not normally be able to afford a home.
Correct.
That was it, mission and vision. That was changed to what Afra has just represented, that the HDC is. So we are back to that position that we're going to have a lot of people who will not be able to afford.
Yes.
Post-pandemic.
Overshi, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject to say that there's in terms of housing, there seems to be very little for those working professionals, those graduates. In Trinidad, in some other countries, we see people, they can work their whole lives and still be able to afford a home, but it seems very difficult here, you know, for working professionals even to afford a home. Anyone's thoughts?
Well, as I said, Obashi, my reaction to that is to look at the actual figures before us. The people who applied to HEC and whose application has been vetted and accepted in the database, 95% of those people can never afford to buy a home. Therefore,
what's that number? Sorry, what's that number of applicants?
The total number of applicants, it might be over 150,000. It fluctuates, okay? But the point I'm making is that if we have a public program and a public agency funded by public money to build affordable housing, we need to build housing for those who cannot afford the housing. It's in the act. It isn't a personal opinion. That is what we are obliged to do by law.
And it's not going to be cheaper because right now there's a global increase in freight. There's a total increase in materials.
Sure.
In fact, we have to go back to where we were in the 70s and introduce fluctuation clauses in contracts.
That's
Gentlemen,
right.
I'm sorry to close the discussion at this point. Maybe we could try to get some more time for this program because the discussion just keeps on going and going. That brings us to the end of tonight's edition of the Pandemic Economy. Thank you for your time, your thoughts, Mr. Aldridge, and of course you, Mr. Raymond. I'm Urvashi Tawari Rupnarayan. You can join Derek Ramsamuj and myself every night in the lead up to the 2022 budget presentation. Let's take a quick break. D-Shaw joins you next.